well. And so thank you, Matt. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Well, thank you, Krista, and get well soon. And welcome everybody. I will share my screen in 1 second. For those of you that know me, and I know I recognize some names on the participants list, it's good to see that your names pop up, and I hope things are well with you, everybody. And you know, you only wish the best for everybody. And for those that don't know me, maybe you're lucky. Yes, as Krista said, I've been a member of PVAS on and off for 20 plus years. And through that migration of nature, I like to call it, if you do hear an occasional dog bark in the background, yes, I have a dog. So it will be verified through cars passing by the house and everything. So let me know if you can see my screen and the full screen right now. Does that look all right?
It looks great, Matt.
Okay, thanks. So bird watching is just one facet of a multifaceted love that I have for the outdoors. Others being hiking. I love astronomy. I have a couple telescopes that I take out when the time allows and when the night sky allows. I've gotten into butterflies in the last 10 years, and I probably have butterflied more than birds in the last 10 years. So a little bit of everything. I just love being outdoors and experiencing the wonders of nature. And no matter how much you see or how much you experience, you're always going to run into something new or something you haven't seen before. So for some of you that know your hawks and raptors very well, this might be a refresher. Maybe somewhere along these next 45 minutes or so, you'll pick up a little nugget that you weren't aware of. Most of the photos that are in this presentation are mine, but some are labeled that aren't mine, that I've accumulated through the many years of hawk watching and raptors. So we're going to basically focus on identification. And how do you know what you're looking at when you're looking at a raptor? And in our general region, there's probably 13 or so species that either reside in West Virginia or in our region, or pass through West Virginia during migration in the spring and in the fall. Some of them are slam dunks. Some of them aren't slam dunks, depending on how much you get to see, right? So as with other birds, raptors are no different. You can get some really good clues by using the general impressions of shape, size, and behavior. Maybe there's certain species that only have a certain behavior, just like passerines or other birds. Shapes and sizes, it might be a giveaway, and you'll see that as we go into the presentation. So whether the bird is on the wing or on the fence, hopefully this will give you a little bit more insight. So first thing we do is learn about the general shapes and sizes of the 4 groups of raptors we're going to talk about this evening, namely accipiters, buteos, falcons, and eagles. They all have distinctive trademarks. Even if you saw them as a backlit silhouette against the sun, like you would see here, you would still be able to drill down to whether it was an accipiter, buteo, falcon, or eagle, just based on the silhouette in most cases, with enough experience. And I must, I've been very fortunate to meet some and gotten a lot of help from a lot of good hawk watchers over the last 20 years, and spent many hours and hours and days at various hawk watching sites, most of it at Snickers Gap, Virginia, where the hawks tend to be a little bit more distant than a typical hawk watch site because it's a lower elevation of only about 1,000 feet. So Binoculars and sometimes spotting scopes are used to try to identify birds that are passing by. So we'll talk about each one of those families right now. The accipiters are forest dwelling. I'm not going to read verbatim here. I'll just sort of look at a bullet point and maybe talk to it because you can read it as well as I can. As you probably have, you're probably aware of our two most common accipiters because they hang out in our area. I will say their names now, but I'll go into them individually in a second. The sharp-shinned hawk and the Cooper's hawk. Typically identified by short rounded wings, a long narrow tail, and that long narrow tail allows them to navigate very fast through very narrow openings in trees and shrubs and everything else. And some of you probably witnessed a Cooper's or a sharp-shinned hawk catching another bird by diving into a bush or going through some wooded area and coming out with the bird in its talons, because that's what the tail helps it do. It helps it navigate. But just based on the shape and the tail length, even if you saw nothing else like that top silhouette, you would know that you had an accipiter of some kind. And then you use more clues to try to figure out what kind of accipiter it is. So the first one is the sharp-shinned hawk. It's our smallest accipiter, not very large. It's about the size of a blue jay. Note on the picture on the upper right, you have a smallish head and a smallish body in proportion to the wings. The bird looks small as compared to a Cooper's hawk, to its cousin, the Cooper's hawk. The wings or the wrists, you can see where it's bent, the wings where the wrists, where they fold back, that's the wrist, the point there. You can see they are folded forward so that the head, if you've got that view that you see in the upper right, barely projects beyond the wingtips, the front of the wings there. And also the squarish tail is a good identifying factor. Not always, but I'd say 90+% of the time. If it's small and stubby looking like this, and with, you take more than one, you take an aggregate of identification factors to come to an ID. It's not just, oh, it's a slam dunk because the wings were forward, but maybe it's has rounded tail, as you'll see in the Cooper's hawk. But you take an aggregate of all the characteristics that you can visually obtain and visually see behaviorally to come to an identification. I'm just showing you on this slide the differentiations from the physical standpoint visually. The squarish tail and the minimal head projection would give you a good clue to that might be a sharp-shinned hawk. The wing beat on a sharp, as I like to call them, sharpies, are very snappy and rapid. So if you see a sharp-shinned hawk on the wing flying, it has a very noticeable trait of gliding and then flapping very rapidly, almost like a butterfly, blah, 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 and then stops and it glides some more. And then it has a rapid wing beat. So it's like, it's on again, it's on again, it's off again, it's on again. Very distinctive behavioral from a behavioral standpoint. Even if it was at a distance and you knew it was an accipiter, just that behavior of how it flaps its wings could give you an identification of a sharp-shinned over Cooper's when you see enough of them. So that's one clue. So that's our Sharpie. The Cooper's hawk, a little bit bigger. There's no overlap, by the way, between a female and a female sharp-shinned, which is the females of the raptors are larger than their male counterparts. or a male Cooper's hawk. There's no overlap in size, even though we're talking an inch. So in an inch and you're looking at a great distance, you're not going to be able to ascertain that. So how do you identify a Cooper's hawk? Well, that long tail, just like a shark shin, right? It's an accipiter. It still has that trait. But when it's flying, you notice that the leading edge of the wing is pretty straight, as opposed to the shark shin where it was bowed forward at the wrists. Remember that on the previous slide? So it gives it an effect of protruding head, and the body looks long overall from head to tip of tail. And it usually, I'd say, it's a good characteristic, not 100%, but it's really, really good. It usually has a rounded tail, and that's quite noticeable even at a distance in binoculars. So put all those characteristics together, and odds are you probably got yourself a Cooper's hawk, and you probably see a lot of those. They overwinter here in the Eastern Panhandle in Washington County, Maryland. More so than shark shins. I see many more Coopers in the wintertime around here, at least where I live out here in Berkeley County, than I see shark shins. So we get very familiar with Coopers coming to the feeders during the winter looking for treats. And I don't mean food, and I don't mean millet. So the wing beat of a Cooper's is stiff and shallow wing beats, and much slower than a shark shin. So behaviorally, that's one clue of how you can tell the difference. Just from even if you couldn't get a good ID because the bird's backlit and you didn't have any physical characters to rely on, that's a behavioral character. If you see a basic shape with a straight wing and it has a shallow, stiff, slow wing beats, not flapping like a rapid fire machine gun, blah, 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 like a shark shin will, you probably have yourself a Cooper's hawk, even if you're not seeing it exceedingly well. So here's a comparison of a Cooper's hawk. Notice how the shark shin and the Cooper's hawk, those two are actually, this was one picture. So this happens to be one picture that Jay McGowan got of them both, of two of them flying in the same direction at the same time. So it must have been at a Hawkwatch site somewhere. But what a great, they weren't that far apart, were they? Yeah. So this is perfect. You see the sharp shin squarish tail, the small head, the bowed wrists, a bowed at the wrist, as opposed to the rounded tail of the Coopers and more or less a straight line. So a flying T as opposed to a flying cross for the Cooper's hawk. And that's a great comparison right there between the two in flight. Now, the third goshawk, the third accipiter we have is the northern goshawk. Very large. They do breed in West Virginia in the highest elevations. And they also migrate through West Virginia in the fall coming from the north. You don't see them very often. I could probably count, I don't know, personally in the last 20 years. Now, I'm not going out looking for goshawks all the time, and I don't go to Hawkwatch sites all the time, but I've spent enough time. I've only seen in probably 15 years at Snickers Gap 3 goshawks go by during fall migration. But at Wagner's Gap, which is a more northerly Hawkwatch, higher elevation, good views on both sides of the ridge, up in just outside of Carlisle, Pennsylvania, I've seen as many as 6 northern goshawks in one day on a real good northwest wind when it's freezing in early November. So if you want to see northern goshawks and you want to get exposed to those, then I recommend going to Wagner's Gap Hawkwatch site just outside of Carlisle in the fall, and around Halloween to the first week of November is a good time. And that's when golden eagles are flying too. So anyhow, this is a big, robust, as you can see, barrel-chested, wide wings, almost like a buteo, with a very white supercilium. And you notice the adult here on the on the right-hand side is an adult. You can see that white supercilium, which is the eyebrow above the eye, very distinctive, even at a great distance. The juvenile down at the lower left, you can still see the supercilium, and that bird was probably a quarter mile or more away. I took that photograph from Wagner's Gap, and that's a crop, obviously, to zoom in a little bit, but that supercilium is very distinctive at a great distance, and they have a very deep wing beat that's commensurate with the type of wings that they have. A wedge-shaped tail, and a longish tail because they are an accipiter. And as I said previously, when this slide first came up, they do breed in the state, probably in the central parts of the highest elevations of Pendleton and Randolph County. You usually don't go out looking for a goshawk. They'll find you, because if you get close to their nest, they will let you know. You'll probably be diving to the ground. They will come after you. But they do breed in West Virginia in very small numbers. Okay, pressing on, buteos. Now we have three buteos that we see the most often that I'm going to talk about. They have wide wings. They're built to utilize air currents, and they're hunters in margins of fields, or they can be up on mountaintops gliding and looking or hovering. But most of them can be found in open areas, and their shape and size are perfect for utilizing thermals and updrafts. And thermals are when it heats up during the day and the ground heats up quicker than the air, the heat rises, and the birds will just ride the thermals, and you'll see red-tailed hawks or red-shouldered hawks or broad-winged hawks just circling and gliding and hardly working at all as far as flapping to burn energy, and they're just looking down looking for food. Or they're migrating depending on the time of year. All three of the hawks I'm going to talk about, these buteos, do breed in West Virginia in good numbers, and you probably see them. You probably have already seen broadwings, and I'm sure you have sharp shins around in the winter, and red tails, of course, are the most prevalent in numbers. The quintessential buteo is the red tail, beautiful bird. The one on the left is a young bird, distinguished by the very thin barring on its tail. See that real thin barring on the tail? And the one on the right, before it got silhouetted, was an adult with the brick red tail. And that's our red-tailed hawk. You can identify them by the squarish wings, wide wings, the belly band. You see that dark area between the head and the wrist, very distinctive. Only red-taileds have that here in our area, and it's the Patagio area. So if that's the only thing you see on a bird and you can't tell whether it's a young bird or an adult bird, you know it's a red tail if you see a Patagio area, because neither red-shouldered hawks nor broad-winged hawks have that. And no other hawks, for that matter, have that in that area that frequent our area. And you saw the juvenile's tail here in the previous slide, the juvenile on the left-hand side with the brownish red tail, rufous tail with the thin barring. You can see the thin barring, and you can actually see that thin barring in binoculars when they're really high up, and you know it's a young bird. All right. But what if you can't see all those markings? Well, remember the silhouettes, and don't forget the behavior, the gliding that they do. You notice this area. If I do this, can you see me moving the mouse on the screen? Krista?
Yes, Matt, we can see your mouse.
All right, so you see where the mouse is here? This is called the secondaries on the wings. This is where the secondaries, the primaries are here, and the secondaries are here, and these bulge out. It's not a straight line to the body. That's called a secondary bulge. That's pretty distinctive and a good characteristic on a soaring or gliding red-tailed hawk. So it's something to look for. So remember the silhouette, even if you don't get a good look. So this, I probably just talked about this slide in advance. Bulging secondaries. You see those here. Relatively short tail, obviously to the body size and the body length. Nothing like the accipiters, right? Wide, a rather shortish tail for a red tail. Actually, the red tail has the shortest tail of the three buteos in our area, relatively speaking. So what do you notice about this one? Well, it's a buteo. It's soaring. It has bulging secondaries. And the wings seem to be in a slight dihedral. And I'm sure most of us know what a dihedral is, right? We see enough turkey vultures who always fly in the dihedral. And that's a good trait of red-tailed hawks when they're soaring or gliding. And this is just a reaffirmation of that. I just like showing pictures. Now you can see this bird on the lower part, on the lower right, is backlit, which means the sun is behind it, and it will illuminate through the primary feathers, and we call those windows on the red tail, and they're squarish in shape. And if you get a chance to see that, that's a factor. But you know, I'm looking at other things like, well, if I can see that, I definitely can see that belly band, and I definitely can see the patageo area, right? The patageo area right here, and the belly band here, and the secondaries are bowed out a little bit. So you didn't need the windows to identify it as a red-tailed hawk, but it tells you it's not something else if you see squarish windows. It's not a red shoulder, and you'll find out why in a second. It's a good segue, right? Little smaller buteo, cute little thing. I love the red-shouldered hawk. It's probably my favorite buteo just because the adult there's nothing like an adult red-shouldered hawk. They are stunningly beautiful, and they're resplendent in their rufous barring on the breast and the black and white tail pattern. Just striking bird all around. Smaller, obviously. They're not obviously, but they are smaller than a red tail. Probably 17 inches in length from tip to head. They flap their wings a little. They flap more. They have notice they have what looks like a slightly longer tail proportionally to their body size than a red tail. Red tail was not quite as long. But what gives them away is the beautiful alternating tail band on the adults. And even on the young birds, you'll see that coming in. I'll give you some other clues in a minute, how you can tell it's a young bird. But the black tail banding is much wider than the white tail bands. And then one of the big clues is instead of windows like we had in the red-tailed hawk, we have these little, it looks like a cusp or a crescent, a little crescent shape, an arc right through here on both sides of the bird. And that, if it's backlit, or is easy to, that's a red-shouldered right out of the gate. You don't even have to see anything else of the bird. You see a gliding bird, it's a little backlit, you see crescents, it's a red-shouldered in our area. And you're done with identification. And you can even see those crescents from the top of the bird, you know, if the bird happens to tilt to where you can see the top of the wings. Now, this bird, the broadwing, migrates out of the area in the fall and goes down to the southern US and Central America. Notice the flame-shaped wings, very, very distinctive flame. Well, they call it the primaries don't really stick out a lot, so it gives it this distinctive, looks like a candle flame, for the lack of a better description. Very distinctive, fine shape, very distinctive shape. Doesn't have the longer fingers like I call these fingers on red tails and red shoulders, which would be longer, the primary feathers. And it has a distinctive black border on adults. This is an adult bird here. And again, broad black tail bands that are wider than the white tail bands, but no crescents. Okay, so no problem. Even backlit, might have a little bit of a window, but there's no belly band, no patagial, so that eliminates red-tailed hawk, and there's no crescents that I can see. So without knowing anything else to look for, it's not a red-shouldered. So the only other buteo in our area that hangs around and breeds here is the broad-winged hawk, and they're just a tiny bit smaller than the red shoulder on average. But I'll tell you, it's hard when you see a bird like this one here, just sitting. That's it's a younger bird. How do you know if you have a younger, how do you know if it's a young red-shouldered hawk or a young broad-winged hawk? It's tough. And I got a slide here that'll point to some clues on how you can tell. The broadwing is one of the favorite birds that people like to look for during fall migration, because they love to take those thermals in the morning. On the third week of September, they peak around the third week of September, coming through Pennsylvania and Maryland and West Virginia on their way south. And these kettles will be in the forms of tens to hundreds in one swarm of kettle. So it looks like a boiling kettle of water that swirls, and they just are using the thermals to get more elevation, more elevation, more elevation. And finally, then they start streaming off like a squadron of bombers, one after another, along the ridgeline, following the thermals, so they don't have to work hard during migration. It is quite a sight to see. And I think people enjoy the broadwings. Their migration time peaks so rapidly, as opposed to protracted migration patterns of the other raptors. The broadwings, you'll start seeing the first ones probably in the first week of September. You'll get onesie twosies, and then they ramp up really steep around the 15th to 23rd of September is peak time, and they'll all ramp up. And I've seen as many as 14,000 broad-winged hawks in one day at Snicker's Gap, which is only an hour from here. And they've had as many as 19,000 in one day. So during peak time, if it's a nice day with some nice east winds and nice thermals, get some sunshine, you can see hundreds and hundreds and thousands of broad-winged hawks during migration in the fall. So I do encourage those of you who are interested in studying these birds a little bit more. There's nothing like that spectacle when you see your first kettle of hundreds of birds, hundreds of raptors in the sky at one time. It's pretty awe-inspiring. So here's a comparison between an immature broad-winged hawk and an immature red-shouldered hawk, right? So the red-shouldered hawk, the tail, first of all, these are young birds. So the banding on the young bird is about even black and white. That's one giveaway. The secondaries band or dark band is not as predominant as it is on the broadwing, but here's the clincher. And yes, the throat is lighter on broad-winged hawks, a young broad-winged hawk. But what do you see in this picture on the right? There's one thing you have to see and you're done. I noticed, you see the crescent? The crescents here on the wings? That's all you need to see. And you know you got yourself a young red-shouldered. And plus, the shape of both of those birds when they're soaring, you notice how the wings are sort of arced in an inverted C forward. Red tails won't look like that at all when they soar, but the broad wings and the red shoulders will. They'll look like their tails are tilted forward when they're soaring. It's pretty cool. So that's a differentiation slide on young birds that are soaring. Here's another thing that people don't know about, or not a lot of people. If you get a perched bird, primary feathers and the secondary feathers are here. And broad-winged hawk, if you see how they look very similar because these are both young birds. But you notice that on the secondary, the barring on the secondary, only the red-shouldered have that. Right? Broadwings and red-taileds don't have that. So there's it for a sitting bird. You look for barring on the secondaries, and if you see that, you know you have yourself a red-shouldered hawk. So it's just another clue. And that's something I've learned in the last 4 or 5 years. It's not something that just came to me. It's like I had a lot of trouble when I saw perched broadwing / red-shouldered hawks in various locations around the state. All right, which one is it? How do I tell? I don't know. And then I found, oh, well, the red-shouldered has white barring on its secondaries. Boy, does that make it a lot easier. All right, let's morph into falcons. Falcons are great. They hunt by speed. They surprise their prey. You know, the Peregrine Falcon's been clocked in a dive over 230 miles an hour. Well, for our purposes here, we have 3 falcons that are in the state, either as breeders or as migrants, and in our case, all 3, because we had just recently, right? We had Peregrine Falcons that nested here at Harper's Ferry across the river on the cliffs there at Merlin Heights. I think it was the first documented nesting there in a long time, decades. And we have Merlins that have now seemed to establish on a regular basis breeding in Canaan Valley. Yeah, for those of you who are familiar with Canaan Valley, our high elevation, a great place to go bird watching, by the way, any time of the year. Maybe not winter, unless you're looking for rough-legged hawks. But yeah, great place to go for anything really, nature-wise. So falcons have a sickle shape. They have this distinctive, after the wrist, the wing is pointed and it bends back like a delta wing on a jet fighter. Remember the delta wings? I'm probably aging myself now. Long pointed wings, a longish tail relative to their body size, and they rarely soar. Rarely soar. You won't, falcons get from point A to point B. You'll see kestrels hover. Yes, they hover, and kestrels, they come off, and you see them on telephone lines, but they don't soar a lot. And especially Merlins and Peregrines, you see them and then they're gone. They're so fast. So the kestrel's a tiny little thing, maybe 12 inches long on average from tip to tail. The males and females are dimorphic, which means that they look different in plumage, which is kind of different between the raptor species. There's a picture of a nice male, has that two-toned rufous back and gray wing. And the female is more just a subtle rufous shape and then has the barring on the tail, where the male has a single broadband black band at the end of its tail. And they look very light underneath, by the way, if you see them at a distance in binoculars. So if they get the pointed wing, notice how this wing is very pointed. You see a very tiny bird, relatively speaking, a 12-inch bird with pointed wings, and you see that tail band and a shiny belly, you got yourself a kestrel. And that's to say nothing of the double mustachioed stripe if you get to see that. So those 2 clues will separate the male and the female and the species. Now this Merlin is probably an inch or 2 bigger on average. Dark bird overall, powerful flapper. When you see a Merlin, you'll see it for 2 seconds and it's gone, because I call it the bullet bird. They go zooming by from point A to point B so fast because of the wing shape, as exhibited by this Merlin flying on the right-hand side. This unfortunate tree swallow, I actually took this picture at a place that used to be a fantastic bird watching location. It was in Berkeley County. And that bird watching location is no longer, it was called Swan Pond. And it was known for shorebirds and wading birds. And I don't know whether the county or the landowner, it should have been a protected wetland, but it got filled in to where it was just a narrow channel. The whole pond got filled in to where it was just a narrow channel to let the stream that fed it go through. And I'm sure that broke the law somehow, but what can we do? It was after the fact. One day it was a beautiful place, and a week later it was all filled in. So anyhow, that was a good 15, 18 years ago when that happened. In the meantime, this Merlin had a successful catch of that poor tree swallow, and just looking at me saying, "You're gonna let me go?" You see the single mustachio stripe on the Merlin and the broad what we call the subterminal band, which is the next last band, the thick black band on the Merlin. It looks dark overall, even at a distance and even close. This bird looks dark overall with the combination of the chest markings and the back markings, which are typically gray on the males and a dark brown on the females. These are two nice representations of the females to the male Merlins. They're dimorphic, and they're young and heavily streaked. And if you see an underwing, if you get a chance to see one open its wings like this, it looks like a checkerboard pattern, doesn't it? It certainly does, and it looks exactly like that. And that's very distinctive, very distinctive. It even looks like it has a little bit of a checkerboard pattern on the male here, doesn't it? Just the pattern on the breast feathers of the male. But that's probably my favorite falcon, just because I never get to see many of them, and they're so fast. I mean, I see peregrines too, but I think these little guys, they stole my heart. I don't know why. It doesn't take much. And that leaves us with our peregrine falcon. Very distinctive. Look at that delta shaped wing there. That bird is built for speed, baby, and it will catch a bird on the wing like nothing. Has a very distinctive helmet. It looks like they have what they call the helmet look. Has a helmet on, and a larger, probably 17 or 18 inches from wingtip to beak tip on average. Very powerful pointing wings, much noticeably larger than the Kestrel or the Merlin. So you usually, and notice this has sort of a checkerboard looking pattern too on the underwing. Just a fast flight. Like I said, this bird's been clocked at over 230 miles an hour in a dive, and I'm sure that there's been further studies since then. These birds can get some speed when they need it. Okay, we got one more family of two birds, and then a couple other straggler birds, as I like to call them, birds that are in their own category. We're going to talk about the eagles now. We love eagles, don't we? We have loved to see the comeback that the bald eagle has made in the last 40 years. If you saw a bald eagle 40 years ago in the Eastern Panhandle, it was a very rare sighting indeed. But fortunately, due to conservation efforts and DDT restrictions, all the raptors have benefited in that regard, and eagles, their numbers have increased tremendously. We're seeing a bald eagle now in Jefferson or Berkeley County. Is nice, but it's not like it's real rare deal. It's like, oh, look, there's a bald eagle. That's very cool. It's nice to see them back. Very large soaring birds with 6 to 7 foot wingspans. And that's pretty big. It's as tall as me, or the wingspan is longer than I am tall on average. And that was an eye-to-eye shot I got in Michigan, in the UP of Michigan. That bird was at eye level. And so I had him do a flyby so I get a picture. An adult bald eagle. Notice by the all white head and the all white tail. So just from a silhouette standpoint, how do you know what kind of eagle it is? Well, time of year will help you, and where you are will help you. But in migration in the fall, you have golden eagles come through the panhandle also. So long, straight wings, held flat, looks like a big plank. This whole wing looks like just one, I would call it a 2x8, like there's not a lot of bulging going on. It's just pretty flat looking wing with a large protruding head. So that's a good profile for a bald eagle at a distance. Immature bald eagles, which we see a lot of, can be confusing and confused with other large birds. It takes 5 years for a bald eagle to reach adulthood. And during those 5 years, they take all kinds of splotchy, blotchy, white and chocolate and combinations thereof forms as they age. One distinctive way to tell that you have a juvenile bird. So the juvenile birds are the first year birds, the first calendar year, young birds, and they'll have white in the we call it the wing pit. It's the axillaries. This is the axillaries of the bird, very white area, and that fills in as they get older and older and older. But you can see this. Here's a young bird, but it's not a first year bird because notice the feathers, the secondary feathers here are not all the same length. You see some that are longer than the other. They molt. The feather molt is different times during the 5 year period, so that you'll have feathers coming in, feathers going out, juvenile feathers still there, first year feathers coming in, etc. So that anything other than a first year bird will look uneven like this. So it's not a juvenile bird. So it's probably this has got a significant amount of white. Still, the head has not got a lot of white on it. So it's probably a second year bird, the second calendar year for the bird, I would say. And this bird starting to get some white on its head. I don't think that's just sunlight. Some of it is, but I think there is white up here. Still a significant amount of white. That could be going between a second and a third year bird. So, third or fourth year bird, just based on the amount of white here. And there's a little bit of a dark band on the tail that I can see. But you have yourself a juvenile or a young bird, an immature bird for 4 years before they hit adulthood with a totally white head and a totally white tail. Now, during the fall, and if you're lucky, maybe you catch one migrating north, but there's the golden eagles, I don't think I've seen many in the spring at all because I haven't really looked for them. Maybe one in 20 years, mostly in the fall when they migrate, and they'll migrate from Canada, where they breed mostly up in Canada, the Gaspé Peninsula up there in the Maritimes of Canada, and the upper tier of the northern US states. They have a large wingspan, but they have bulging secondaries. And you notice this one has bulging secondaries. And this isn't an adult bird. And I'll wait till the next slide that tells you why it's an adult bird. The linings looks like a lot like a turkey vulture lining here, gray linings, as I like to call them, of the primaries and secondaries. Takes a grayish cast. See how it looks gray? But the head is much smaller in proportion to the body than the bald eagle. Bald eagle's head in proportion to its body is much larger. Where was that big boy? Now that's probably not the best angle. I was trying to see one of these other pictures. See this head projection? It's huge compared to how far it projects out from the body. And you see enough golden eagles and bald eagles, you'll be able to tell immediately what it is, even during silhouette. Not much of a head projection. So what makes the golden eagle? Well, it gets its name from the golden feathers on the nape, which is the back of the neck. Right here, it has a golden look, tawny colored. Longish tail, gets dark when it's an adult, and a relatively small head, like I said before. But then you have the real cool looking immature golden eagles which have a very broad black tail band with a white tail base, and then the white wing patches on the inner primaries. And this white wing patch can be seen not only underneath the bird, but on top of the bird. So on both, if you're looking down on the bird, you can see those two typically. So it's very distinctive look. No bald eagle's ever going to look like that, ever, in any plumage. So it's a beautiful bird. I love golden eagles because I don't get to see a lot of them. There's no known documented nesting in West Virginia that I'm aware of to this point. Now, that's not saying they couldn't, because Pendleton County and Randolph County has some really great areas, and they have nested as far south as Tennessee, documented couple in Tennessee in the early 2000s. So it's not saying it couldn't happen. Just, I don't think we've ever, when people report, I saw in June, you get a mid-June report of a golden eagle, people start scrambling. What, you sure? Go find a nest. All right, we got a couple more birds to talk about. The osprey. Everybody knows our fish eagle, right? Very distinctive M shape, white belly and head with the dark carpal wrists, very distinctive looking. It has the, even at a great distance in binoculars, you can see the dark eye line behind the eye. All a great water bird in lakes, ponds, rivers, creeks. You'll find them. Females have this necklace or brownish spots around the neck. And males are pretty clean. So if you wanted to sex the particular osprey in flight, that's one characteristic way of doing it. But they always show that characteristic M shape in flight, very distinctive. And our last bird, but not the least, is our northern harrier, a field dweller, likes to feed in fields. You'll see harriers flying very low over grassy fields, looking for prey. Very distinctive shape. They have a long wingspan of 3 to 4 feet, a very long tail, but wide wings. So that's sort of, well, wider than what I would say the accipiters have. So you're not going to confuse this bird for an accipiter because they usually fly with a little bit of a crook in their wing. And you see the head here, looks like it has almost an owl face to it, doesn't it? The owl disc is what I like to call it. The distinctive of some owls have a face like that, a side profile like that. They do fly with a very distinctive dihedral, and they teeter and totter, and they fly really low. And probably the biggest identification factor for the northern harrier is a very bright white rump patch. Now, you can have other raptors that have those, and you'll see those in flight, red tails and Cooper's hawks and things. They'll have what they call the upper tail coverts, which are up here, the upper tail coverings, what they call them, coverts, up here, depending on your sun angle. But the shape, the wing shape and the flight is, and the long tail is not going to be a red tail or a Cooper's hawk. It's easy to distinguish a harrier from a Cooper's hawk or a red-tailed hawk. So that white rump patch is a very good clue. Females have belly streaking, or if they're buffy and clean like this one, that's probably a first-year bird, young bird. But notice he still has the owl face, looking face. So young bird and a female are both brownish. The adult males are smaller and are silvery with black wing tips, and they look very cool. And we call them gray ghosts because they're gray on the top. And they're very cool looking bird to see in migration or hovering and flying, looking for food over a field. And one more look at the northern harrier, and this shows the rectangular white rump, which is very distinctive. on the male on the right and the female / young bird. It looks like a female because of the streaking on the breast. Looks like an adult female on the lower left. So you'll find those all throughout West Virginia at different flights, but mostly open fields where they like to hunt. Now, of course, given all of these 13 species, there are caveats. You know, you have to go out and experience. Birds change shape depending on where you are in relation to where they are and the angle of view that you get and the light and the winds, because some birds in a very strong northwest wind that's blowing 40 miles an hour, most birds will try to go into a very delta wing shape to cut through the wind. And then I don't want to say they all look like falcons, but they definitely start to take on a falcon shape on a very strong wind. So you got to look for other clues to try to ID the bird. So it's not always one size fits all, right? It's the aggregate of the clues that you get to come to an identification. A falcon in a glide may spread its tail, right? A buteo looks great. Its red tail looks, you know, awesome when it's 90 degrees straight up, but when it's tilted going away in the sunlight, it looks like this. And it makes so these are the things you have to experience. You still see the bulging secondaries, but you still have to experience birds. And it's not just, oh, I saw it. What was it? And you look at your partner and they say, oh, it's a red tail. Okay, cool. No, spend time with the bird. Also, with any bird, and this is not just raptors, nobody is right 100% of the time. There are exceptions. Once you've ID'd a bird, stay on it, because now you know what it is. See how it moves, see how it flaps, see how it glides. How does it look at different angles as it goes away from you, or if it's coming towards you? Just stay on it and you'll learn more. And the more you see of those, the more you'll learn. And raptors are just a very, very fascinating group of our that we're lucky to have all around the world, but especially in North America. Here's some web resources, and I can give these to Krista at the end, just this page to show a couple websites if you're interested, or a couple apps, book resources. That those hawks from every angle and every distance are great to show what birds look like on the wing at a distance, or from a hawk watch site, or you know, any doesn't have to be a hawk watch site, but typically it is. The late Jerry LaCourie, who just passed away in the last year, did a fantastic job. He was world renowned, but really did a lot to further identification in North America with raptors in general. And of course, the bird, the ID, the apps for smartphones, Raptor ID, the Merlin ID. These are all tools that you can use So now I started slow, and then I started talking faster because I didn't know what my time was, and I'm looking at my time, and it's a little less than an hour, so it wasn't terrible. I hope, and I see we have some chat questions now, so let me open those up, and I hope volume is fine. Yes, okay. I hope you got to hear. I hope you heard me throughout this. I saw northern goshawk at the Peter Burr House. Yes, I've been there. Oh, that's awesome. I've only seen one northern goshawk that I could identify for sure in the Eastern Panhandle. Yep. So it was moving through. And it's pretty cool. You see one of those, you've got a bonus bird if you're here. In the mountains, you might have a better chance. Are the slides available for downloading? Well, they can be. I can coordinate with Krista after the fact, and the PVAS has a resources folder that people can surf and download objects we can do that.
I'll look into that.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, and I've also had an eagle. I've had an osprey land on a pond, local pond where I live out here in Berkeley County, grab a fish, and then a bald eagle came and harassed the osprey to where it dropped the fish, and then it got the fish. Survival of the fittest, as they say.
Yeah.
Yep, Antietam Creek. Any place where there's water is a great place for osprey and eagles because that's where they live. Oh, I appreciate it, Casey. Thanks. I hope if you all picked up something, even if it was just one nugget out of 1,000 that I talked through, that just gives you one more quiver in your arrow case to help and identify raptors. So with that, I'm going to be quiet and stop sharing my screen and turn it back to Chris.
Okay, so one question was, do you happen to know any children's books that are good for raptors? And if you don't, you could, Deborah, you could email me and I can pass it on, or you could email Amy, Amy Thomas, not Amy Moore anymore, and Amy at PotomacAudubon.org. I bet you she is a great resource, man. She has some excellent children's books up her sleeve. So feel free to reach out to me or to Amy on that if Matt doesn't have any good suggestions for children's books.
I don't, right off the top.
That would be great. I have to say that with the beaver talk, I've used some of those beaver books, and my little readers, my little listeners love them.
Great. I'll let Allison know that. Definitely. Allison's going to present in Morgan County in towards the end of the summer as well, her beaver program. So it's a good beaver program. So does anyone want to unmute themselves and ask Matt any question at this point?
I have a question. The Peregrine Falcons, are they only found along the river still?
In our area, that's where they've been seen because of the ability to have food very close, like pigeons, things like that. That's why they were at Harper's Ferry. They will nest on cliffs. So if you don't have cliffs, you're probably not going to see a nesting site for peregrines. But out in the western part of the state, like the New River Gorge, are you familiar with the New River Gorge area, David?
Yeah, I went to school up in Garrett County, and we used to see the falcons all the time along the waterways up there.
Yeah, Cooper's Rock, around that area, Garrett County. That's in Morgantown. That's near Morgantown, but that's not far.
Right.
Where there's cliffs and there's water, that's the best place to look for falcons in the summertime. Sure. Now migration, all bets are off. They're migrating, so you can see a falcon anywhere. You can see it in the downtown area. In the winter, I've seen a peregrine falcon sitting on buildings in Parkersburg, West Virginia, just because it's all about food. The pigeons are very cheap and easy to catch. So, yeah. So, but in general, your statement is absolutely correct. Yeah. But
Now,
yeah, go ahead.
why do you think they returned after so many years to Harper's Ferry, that cliff line right there at Maryland Heights?
I just think that I'm just guessing. This is just my opinion. I think that their numbers have increased to the point where there's more of them to look for spaces now. They have been when they release birds, when they raise birds from infancy and release them into the wild. This is known as falcons, and raptors are called hacking. If you called hacking raptors, and they've hacked peregrines from Maryland Heights before, but they never came back. And not sure if this bird was hacked from several years ago and finally came back, or whether it just found good digs because it's like, oh, there's a town with food and there's water and there's cliffs for the nest and I can hide. So it's a combination of all three. So I'm hoping that there's more population now of falcons, because the Merlin numbers have went up dramatically in the last 20 years. And this has been documented through trends in the hawk watching sites up and down the East Coast. So that's because DDT usage and things like that, that's what was killing them off. They would have young, but the eggs got so fragile, thin, that they would never survive to hatch because of the DDT, because of the food they were bringing back, where they ingested, and it affected the eggs. So when that stopped, then the bald eagles and the falcons have made a good comeback. I've seen less numbers of red tail in migration. Now, my personal opinion on that is than 15 years ago. Is it because the climate's warmer now and they don't have to migrate as far south because they can find food farther north? So they only come to Pennsylvania or New York. That's just a theory. Definitely seeing less buteos, I think, for me, in the last 15 years, coming through the Eastern Panhandle in October, November during fall migration. But peregrines, I mean, falcons and the eagles are doing great. The numbers are way up. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
That's good, because I don't remember what it was.
Do you think that they'll be coming back to that Harper's Ferry cliff line?
I would hope so. Now that they had a successful hatching,
Mhm.
I would think so. We will find out very shortly.
So would they permanently barricade off that area at Maryland? Are you familiar with that? Like what?
I'm not familiar. I sort of saw pictures. There was one guy that was constantly monitoring it.
Mhm.
I forgot his name. And nobody's going to go down to harass them because they'd kill themselves trying. They'd have to rappel down the cliff to get to it. And that's the whole point, that the birds want to be in a safe place for their young. And it's inset into the cliff too, for protection from the elements.
Mhm.
So I don't know if they would, the hiking trail that goes up to the top of Maryland Heights, I don't think they restricted that last year that I'm aware of. Are you? During when they were breeding?
The Maryland Heights was still there was still an orange fencing, I believe.
At the top?
Not at Stone Fort, but at Maryland Heights Overlook.
Okay, well, there you go. Well, maybe they were, and maybe they will again then. I wasn't
Yeah.
aware of that.
Yeah. So Casey says that they have enjoyed some golden eagles out a couple of times in the Back Creek Valley. They see them in the fields there. So that's pretty cool.
In the fall, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Robert Taylor is thanking you and for making the slides available. Just so everyone who is still on here knows, the goal is to have the link to this Zoom available under monthly programs on PotomacAudubon.org. So it's a little bit tricky to get it on there. So it's beyond my technological capabilities. So I rely on Chanda. So when she's able to get that on there, you can rewatch this to review. Sometimes it really helps to watch things a few times to really have it sink in. So it will be available eventually. Okay, anyone else want to throw something in the chat or unmute themselves and ask Matt? Oh, we got a question. I'm from Ohio, but my daughter lives in your area and told about what was the website again, please. Oh, okay. I will type it right here. It is Potomac, AUDU.org. PotomacAudubon.org. Thank you for joining from Ohio. It's exciting to have you.
Yeah, really.
Okay.
Well, thanks, everyone.
Yeah, this was really excellent. I think that I will enjoy reviewing what you showed us this evening once we get on the website, because there was a lot of information and I desperately want to be able to say to someone that is a red-tailed hawk or whatever. So I do need a review, but it was really basic and thorough and I appreciated that. So I think some really good tips for us to take away.
And remember, the whole trick is you can have the information and you can look at all the books in the world and you can watch videos on YouTube and all that, but there's no substitute for going out and getting out in the field and spending time. That's how you learn.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. So, well, wonderful. I am going to miss seeing all of you through the summer months, but hopefully I'll see you in other venues. But we appreciate you joining us for the monthly program this evening, and I really look forward to returning on September 14th, hopefully in person, for our monthly programs for the fall series. So everyone, enjoy our warmer weather finally, and I hope you have a nice evening and a nice rest of your week. And Matt, thank you so much. This was really enjoyable.
Oh, thanks a lot for having me.
Excellent job.
We'll see you all later then. I hope to see
Okay.
some of you in the field. That's right.
That's right. Hopefully.
All right.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Everyone have a great evening.
Guys, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.